Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the South Florida Tribune Podcast. My name is Scott Morganrock, Motor City Madmouth, and Ron Renzy with the fingers up, and Joe Littman with the Orange Bowl behind. What's up, fellas?
Not much, Scott. How are you doing today?
All right. Well, we're going to have a blast here, and I'll actually fit in with this one. I won't be out to lunch with the legal stuff tonight. I can handle this broadcast. Not that I can handle the other ones, but this will be a little bit different or a lot of it different. So, meanwhile, game one of the World Series tonight, when the Tampa Bay Rays and the LA Dodgers takes place, I have to tell you, the Miami Marlins won the 1997 World Series and 2003 World Series, playing a part of Major League Baseball. And it was ironic today that I had a chance to go on a Marlins media availability with Don Mattingly, who seemed very rested in his living room and was very happy today that he could actually eat out of his own plates and didn't mind saying that he was sick and tired of eating out of plastics, plates, silverwares, and all that. And he was relaxed, although I can tell Skip was a little bit drained for obvious reasons. The Marlins had to deal with a lot. And when we talk about the sports theme tonight, you know, we talk about the fact that in 2003, I saw the Marlins defeat the San Francisco Giants that led them to their 2003 World Series triumph over the New York Yankees. And here we are doing a broadcast tonight, night of the World Series. So how about that? How appropriately timed is that, fellas?
I think that works perfectly, Scott. I mean, it's hopefully it will be a good series.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I don't have a rooting interest either way, the Dodgers or the Rays. To me, it's just good that I guarantee you one thing, one drought will break. Tampa Bay Rays have never won a World Series, and the Dodgers haven't won one since 1988. So, and of course, we're talking about the battle for Titletown. Will it be Tampa, where you have the Tampa Bay Lightning, and maybe the Tampa Bay Rays, or the Los Angeles Dodgers, along with the Lakers? Well, something's going to have to give in that sense, and that'll be decided in the next 7 days. So,
I didn't think about that. One of these towns is going to have two titles quite soon. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Well, you know, again, this is my element, guys. I'm supposed to come up with this stuff. So, but tonight's going to be a very great broadcast, and I'll tell you what. We're going to talk about the South Florida sports in the good old days, and boy, there is a lot of stuff. Back in 1981, 84, I lived here in South Florida, but my first tenure, and I remember working for the New Horizons school paper back in the day, and I also worked for a weekly paper called the Hallandale Digest. So I had an opportunity to get a feel for sports in the community, and I'm going to tell you, back then, all we had in the area to work with, we had the Miami Dolphin, Miami Hurricanes football. They held their spring game actually at Lockhart Stadium in Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale Strikers, the North American Soccer League. Boy, that was primitive. Miami Marlins actually played in the Florida State League. And I met a very good friend named Larry Bluestein. To this day, Larry Bluestein and I are very good friends. And Sonny Hirsch, they were both in charge of the Miami Marlins operation at the time. And I can tell you, I spent lots of time with Sonny and Larry, including times up at Fort Lauderdale Stadium where we would have, obviously, doubleheaders that in Fort Lauderdale went till 2 in the morning. Thankfully, you can get away with that at Fort Lauderdale Stadium. Try to do that at the old Miami Stadium, and you're going to get shot, killed, crucified, whatever. That wasn't an area you wanted to be in at the wrong time. And, of course, the Fort Lauderdale Yankees. And let's not forget that you had spring training. It was really, really big in South Florida. You had the Baltimore Orioles at Miami Stadium, New York Yankees at Fort Lauderdale Stadium, the Montreal Expos and the Atlanta Braves shared a stadium up at West Palm Beach Municipal Stadium, and the Texas Rangers played over at Pompano Beach Municipal Stadium. So
yeah, I was actually, since we didn't have a team locally, I was actually a Baltimore Orioles fan back then for two reasons. One, everybody else I knew was a New York Yankees fan, and I was always the contrarian because I didn't want to go for the more popular. And the Orioles were the team that played in Miami. So
right.
So yeah.
That's when you get back in the day.
The Orioles would end up moving to Fort Lauderdale Stadium when the Yankees bolted for Tampa. Sorry, go ahead, Ron.
No, I said back in the day, I was an Atlanta Braves fan because it was on TV. I remember the old TBS days when it would show in South Florida. But as soon as the Marlins came into existence in 1993, I bolted for the Marlins and been a Marlins fan ever since. And you're right, the Yankees are gone, the Orioles are up in Sarasota, the Pirates are in Sarasota. I mean, everything's the the Mets. I mean, there's no spring training in the area anymore. It's
Well,
interesting.
kind of. All your teams are in Palm Beach County now. The Marlins and the St. Louis
Right.
Cardinals are up in Jupiter, and then of course the Washington Nationals, who used to be the Expos, share a facility with the Houston Astros over in West Palm Beach, and of course the Mets are up in
That's right.
Port St. Lucie.
For St.
What-
Lucie. So I guess they're still in the area.
Right, but not in Dayton Broward. Of course, the Dodgers used to be at Vero Beach. Now, ironically, my mentor Tony DeMarco worked for the Miami Herald when I worked at the Hallandale Digest. And for a lot of you horse racing fans out there, I covered a Florida Derby over at Old Gulfstream. And I know one name that many of you folks in South Florida are familiar with is Hank Goldberg.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Hank
Oh, yeah.
Goldberg used to announce
I
the
know.
game with Rick Weaver, and I got to know Hank
Mhm.
really, really well, and saw him at a Florida Derby. I think like 7, 8 years ago. I think Hank actually moved out to Vegas, and we can't forget about the old days when you had the Hollywood Greyhound track, where I
Mhm.
actually saw some dog racing. And of course, everybody talks about Dania Highlight. You talk about primitive days of South Florida. When we start talking Highlight and Greyhound track, that's unbelievable. Now I've got
I remember good old going the highlight. I guess Joe, you said it's still out there, huh?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's not nearly as popular as it was its heyday back in the back in the '80s when I was a kid. Yeah, people in school used to talk about it. Like, I remember there was this one player named Joey that was like really popular. I mean, like, to remember a highlights player name from 30 years ago, it's kind of
It just shows how popular it was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my Aunt Pearl introduced me to that sport. I never really understood it. All I know is she was screaming a little. A few people realize until you get older how fixed it really was. But
I don't think people really understood it so much that they knew they could bet on it. That's all that really mattered, probably.
now I got to tell you a funny dog racing story, though. When I was out in El Paso, Texas, we ended up going to Juarez to bet on the Juarez dogs out there. And there was a dog by the name of Bill Walton. Okay, Bill Walton. And I'm thinking to
dog.
myself, I'm going to bet on this dog. I figure maybe.
Really?
Yeah, Bill Walton out in Juarez.
He always had bad wheels, though. Like, he was like bad knees. I wouldn't have bet on him.
On a dog? I figured the dog got to be faster than the player, for God's sake. And as it turns out, my parimutuel bet in Mexico, Bill Walton, the dog, finished last. Oh, well.
Oh, there you go.
Moral of the
Bad
story.
wheels, just like Bill Walton, the basketball player.
I know. If it was $2 to burn on it, I didn't care. It was because I got a story out of the whole thing, anyways. Even if I learned the hard way about the water when my ice melted in my Diet Coke, and all of a sudden I got sick of ice. I didn't know
that's
anything
funny.
about that.
See if his name was like Walter Payton or something like that, or Barry Sanders.
Well, they
Barry
were
Sanders,
the
the dog.
choices. Bill Walton was the choice, so I had to draw the ironic coincidence with Bill Walton, the dog, versus Bill Walton, the player. And
Well, in Florida, guys, dog racing is going away, which you guys know. So that's going to be a thing of the past pretty soon.
yeah, no, I heard about that. It's too bad, but I understand why. But it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that the racetracks are going away. What are they using them for? Gambling, slots, and whatnot. I think they're all being converted to those, aren't
Yeah.
they?
I would think so. They're not going to just get rid of them. I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, they've
That's a good
rebuilt
question.
Gulfstream. I'll tell you, they've done a magnificent job then.
Yeah, they have.
I remember the president of Gulfstream, Doug Don, and I wrote a story on him many years ago, a couple times, and I used to hang out with him because at the time, the Hallandale Digest, I had an easy credential there to go there, and I had carte blanche with Gulfstream. Now I'll try to get through there. It's like pulling teeth. But talk about some memories. Now I'm going to tell you, though, when I talk about some of the big-time media guys, I'm going to drop some names. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Maybe you are, Ron. I don't know. But everybody knows about Tony Segreto, right? But he used to be a sports guy
Yeah,
for Channel 4 when Ralph Rennick was in charge and doing the broadcast.
I remember.
I
him.
remember.
Do you?
I'm old. I remember.
And what about Chuck Dowdle?
Yeah, I remember him. He was on Channel 10.
Right. He moved out to.
That's right.
He went to Atlanta, didn't he?
Yeah, he went on to Atlanta. That's what he said. So, but Chuck, I
Wow.
used to see him all the time there. Many years ago, I met one of my good friends for a long time, Andy Loscano. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he was only in town probably in the 80s, so I don't think you were there. But he ended up moving around he went from Miami to LA to wherever. But some other familiar names back in the day. You had Bernie Lincecum. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
No, I don't know him.
He worked for the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, went on to the Chicago Tribune, and then he went out to Denver and started working there. Mitch Albom, I'm sure you probably heard of him.
Of course.
Mitch Albom. And for the Miami Herald, you had Edwin Pope and Bob Rubin.
Mm-hmm.
They were big. And one of my longtime friends I actually met ever heard of Mark Wilson?
Mm-mm.
Well, Mark Wilson was actually the weekend guy when Tony Segreto was here back in the day. And, of course, Chris Myers also worked in the area. And Mark and I are very good friends on Facebook. And Mark and I've known him probably longer than a lot of people, but geez, back in 1982. We were both there. He ended up moving on to Detroit, where he's done a lot of radio and TV work in Detroit. And he ended up moving to Las Vegas as well. And I should point out, I mentioned Hank Goldberg, but that was just an unbelievable time when you meet some of the people out there. And like I said, Mark Wilson, he's good people. And I've had him on my show from time to time. And I'm trying to remember some other guys that stood out. But Larry Bluestein and Sonny Hirsch is an icon in the area. Sonny Hirsch, to me, did University of Miami football as I understand it. And he was the voice of Miami sports. But if it weren't for him and Larry Bluestein, at least keeping Miami involved with baseball, I think that they played an intricate part of the Miami Marlins landing in Major League Baseball because of the long-standing relationship. And they knew what they had to do, because that Miami team, after the Orioles affiliation went away, they had the San Diego Padres one year, then they went on to be the independent Miami Marlins. So there's a little bit of a story line there. But and some other great memories I had back then is I actually met Muhammad Ali through somebody over at Allen Park Gym in North Miami, and I became friends with Angelo Dundee. And in 1981, during the baseball winter meetings, I met Tom Lasorda at the old Diplomat Hotel in the 1981 winter meetings. You know, they used to hold it at the Diplomat, and boxing was big back in the day as well. But my mentor, Tony DeMarco, worked for the Miami Herald, and prior to that, you had the Hollywood Sun-Tatler. So you've got a lot of history there in terms of that you didn't have a lot of sports, but what you had, the pond was big enough to think that who would have thought it was the Dolphins, the Strikers, and Miami Hurricanes football. Well, and none of us could have imagined the Miami Heat, Florida Panthers, and the Miami Marlins in Major League Baseball, much less the fact that they won 2 World Series. And yet one of those World Series, ironically, was against the New York Yankees.
Yes, it was.
And I can remember.
Certainly was, my friend.
I can remember many times the Miami Marlins and the Fort Lauderdale Yankees. So I'm thinking to myself, you talk about some Major League history. And yet this year, the Miami Marlins rode to the playoffs. They took 2 or 3 from the New York Yankees out in Yankee Stadium.
That's right. Well, if you think about it, the Marlins, the Panthers, and the Heat, considering they're not very old teams, they have a pretty good history. You know, maybe short, but not too bad so far.
Well, not so much the Panthers, but the Heat.
A little bit.
Well, the Panthers actually have one trip to the Stanley Cup Finals, and they've struggled there. But I got to tell you what, though, they built a beautiful arena out here in the suburbs, so they're certainly easier for us. I love going to the Panthers arena from Deerfield. It's only a 20-minute drive right down the Sawgrass. And, of course, here in Coral Springs, where we're broadcasting, you know, they're not that far away either off of Sample Road. So
it's easy.
all the teams are out here. It would make my life a lot easier.
Well, the Heat should be playing there. Remember when they built that stadium, they were hoping that the Heat would come there because Miami wasn't going to build them a stadium. So
that's right.
So Broward's like, okay, we'll build it. And then all of a sudden, when they were faced with the prospect of losing the Heat, we're like, okay, we'll build it now.
And they did.
It's crazy to have 2 stadiums like that in one local market that, I mean, is that common these days for cities to have two, like a separate stadium for their hockey team and their basketball team? Because, I mean, most of them share it, don't they?
Well, they do now. But back in Michigan, though, I really tell you what, I enjoyed when the Pistons were playing at the Palace of Auburn Hills and the Red Wings were playing downtown. Depends on if you're looking for the Scotch and whiskey crowd or if you're looking for the old beer crowd, then it was a different area depending where you're at. For Detroit, for example, the Red Wings had to play downtown because they have Windsor across the border, and the Pistons ended up going there. I'm still surprised they made the move, but, many of them are starting to utilize the stadiums for multiple teams for sure, Joe.
Well, it doesn't it make sense economically if you share your hockey team and a basketball team? Just like a lot of the looking at the Orange Bowl, a lot of the pro teams and the college teams, whether it's the Hurricanes or the USF Bowls that share the stadium with the Bucks. I mean, it kind of makes practical sense at some points.
I think most college campuses have their own. That was one thing about the Hurricanes, which I always thought would have been nice if they had a stadium on campus. They just don't have enough space down there.
They don't have the space, right? I think it's more for. I guess some colleges just don't have space, and that's a good point.
I mean, I think it's a shame that those students have to go. I mean, it's a pretty far drive to go from Coral Gables to Miami Gardens to attend a game. I mean, there really should be an on-campus stadium. It's not like they get that many fans for most of their games.
No, you're right. You're right.
They can hold the Florida State game there. Because other than that, they usually don't get more than like 50,000 people at a game.
It's just a matter of space. I mean, well, it's the same for Scott for USF. It's not that close to the stadium, the Raymond James, is it?
Well, you know what, though? That's different because USF has always been known for being a commuter school anyway. So they more or less handle everything. When I went there from 84 to 86, I went there because it was commuter school, and I worked at the Tampa Tribune. So it really didn't matter. I think there are isolated situations where it's good that the pro team and the college team do share the same facility. And for USF, now I think they'd like to get an on-campus facility, but I was out there about a year ago, and there's probably room for it, but why bother? I don't know where they would put it anyways. When you only have so much land out in northwest Tampa, that's for sure. And, so it's interesting, but it's hard to imagine, though, when you look back in time for South Florida sports, that, like I told you, I can name drop all day long some of my best friends that I still am in contact with today. The first PR guy I ever worked with is Chip Namias, who started with the Fort Lauderdale Strikers and moved on to the Miami Dolphins. Kevin Rand, the Detroit Tigers trainer, and I are great friends. And, of course, a lot of the Fort Lauderdale Yankees that I dealt with back in the day, I stay in contact with. But Fort Lauderdale Stadium was still used a little while when FAU had to go ahead and play at Lockhart until they ultimately moved on to their own on-campus stadium. Lockhart Stadium was used for high school football.
Mm-hmm. I went to many a game there.
What's that?
I went to many a game there. Didn't your high school actually play there?
They did, yes.
Yes,
they did.
Speaking of FAU, I went to Florida Atlantic University before there was football, and to actually think FAU has an on-campus stadium and it's built up so much since I've been there, it just kind of boggles my mind. Talk about a little commuter school. Now it's of all the of the college teams we're talking about, FAU has a stadium.
Yeah,
think about that.
I got to tell you though, I considered going to FAU in '84, but two things went into play there. Number one, I got a job offer from the Tampa Tribune to go up to Tampa, and I felt that the editing, I would become a better writer with better editors up in Tampa for the Tribune than I was at the Digest. The Digest was great when I was learning. It was a good stepping stone. I got paid all right, fair, got it treated pretty well by the Blueston family. But in the end, I needed to be with the Tampa Tribune because I felt if I was going to stay in journalism a long, long time, I had the best editors, and I learned a lot, and I still have a lot of lifelong friends there. But I'm going to tell you, Joe Robbie once looked at that stadium that you have right there behind you, Joe, and called it a museum. And I did an interview with him one-on-one. He told me, I'm getting him out of here. I'm going to be in debt forever, so I might as well get him out of this place. He couldn't stand Joe Robbie. Orange Bowl, and built his own place, and I commend him for it.
No, he got a bad rap for being stingy when it came to paying players, but I got to hand to him. He did something that I don't know if it's precedented, in sports where an owner uses his own money to build a stadium, because now it's, the ransom game. You want to keep us in town? You got to build us a stadium, otherwise we're leaving to go somewhere else.
That's true.
And cities will pay it.
Yeah, that's true. But I will tell you, his business model, when he built Joe Robbie Stadium, Bill Davidson of the Detroit Pistons built the palace out of his own pocket and used the exact same blueprint that Joe Robbie did, but only in a much smaller scale level from an arena standpoint. But but back then, the Florida State League is what you had, and there were a lot of great prospects that came out of there. The North American Soccer League was obviously big back in the day, and as I mentioned to you before, when you talk about some of the people that I mentioned before, between Bernie Lincecum, Mitch Albom, Bob Rubin, Edwin Pope, these are great writers. Don Shula and Howard Schnellberger were the coaches around.
Oh, yeah.
The Miami Dolphins, Miami Hurricanes football strikers, and the Miami Marlins, Fort Lauderdale Yankees, Orange Bowl. That was what we had. There was no 595. There was none. I mean, you talked about the Florida Marlins, right, Ron, when they were named the Florida Marlins?
Right, and they played in the same stadium as the Dolphins.
Right, multi-purpose thing. But I think they knew that stadium, you couldn't survive with Major League Baseball in an open-air stadium as you needed a dome stadium.
I think you're right.
Well, yeah, had no choice. I mean,
well, I think David Sampson of the Marlins, or Howard Sampson, whatever his name was, realized that if they owned the stadium and they had boxes, they could make more money, even if they had less people going there. I think they could have survived there, but I think it was just a money grab. They wanted to make as much money as they possibly could, and if they could get Dade to help them pay for the stadium, then I think it was that, and we'll be in it for a few years, and then we'll sell the team as a package, and they made a killing off of it. They made a killing.
Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah,
that's
Jeffrey
exactly
Loria,
what happened.
That was a huge fleece job, wasn't it, Jeffrey Loria?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, getting that save. But I have to admit, sitting at the old Joe Robbie Stadium in the summer, watching a baseball game, being baked in the sun, it wasn't the most comfortable thing. So even though it's not close, the stadium, Marlins Park, is a beautiful park. It really is.
It
wasn't so much for us.
I don't think the issue was so much the heat. It was, for me, it was if the weather was iffy, I wasn't going to chance it, because if it was going to rain, to go all the way down there to park, get in there, and then have a rain delay and have to hang around. I mean, because once it was on an evening, once it was a rain delay, you're like, okay, forget it. I'm out.
No, you're right. You're right.
I think that was the problem. You got a lot of people who were didn't know whether they should go to a game, because during the summertime it rains a lot. So
that's true. You don't have to worry about that at Marlins Park.
No.
Roof gets closed, and it's nice. It's nice and comfortable with the roof closed and the air on. It's very comfortable. Well, you could sit down, relax.
It's a good retractable building. I remember in Toronto over at Skydome, they built a retractable roof there. And then, of course, Milwaukee, Miller Park is a retractable situation. But the only difference between Miller Park and, of course, Miami, you have the bad weather coming in from the cold weather, the snow, whatever. Whereas in Miami, like you guys just alluded to, it was mainly about the rain. Yeah. Either way, you definitely have a stadium which you're able to utilize no matter what, and you can put a lot of good events in there as well. So,
and they do. So, which one of you guys can talk about Joe Robbie Stadium? Which one of you guys can name all the names that stadium's been since it was built?
Oh God!
Well, it was Pro Player. It was Sun Life.
Right.
It was now it's Hard Rock. It was just Dolphin Stadium when it didn't have a sponsor. It was Land Shark Stadium.
That's right.
And then just Dolphin Stadium. So at least.
And don't forget Joe Robbie Stadium.
Well, you said Joe Robbie Stadium, though.
Oh, right. That's true. I did.
Well, I'm never calling it anything but Joe Robbie Stadium. But those people
Exactly.
are standing up and they want to pay my advertising. They can get my promos all day long. To me, it's Joe Robbie Stadium, and one of the few people that I can actually say that I interviewed the man that built the stadium, and when it was nothing more than just dead land out by Calder Racecourse is what it was.
True. Well, what do you think about all the additions that Stephen Ross did to the stadium? It's really nice now. I mean, it was nice, but it's really updated and a lot going on there. And they have the Miami Open Tennis Tournament on site, which I think was a really good addition, just to add more sports to the area.
All right, I'll tell you what I think, and it's probably not what you expect, because we alluded to this when we were talking last week about what we were going to talk about with the show. I liked the Orange Bowl because it was, it was no nonsense. You went there for football.
Right.
I could have used more bathrooms and not have to wait in line to pee in a sink because there wasn't a toilets. But other than that, I like that, because you were there to watch football. The people around you were there to watch football, and you had a good crowd of people who were really into the game. You go to a Dolphins game now, and it's so corporate. So many people are there just to hobnob and just to be in their luxury skybox or their club seating, and go up to those areas to, like, what are you there for? Like, if you're not there to enjoy the game or watch the game as a fan, then why are you there? Like, so to me, as a fan, a lot was lost when they built these beautiful, expensive, sports palaces. Sure, they're nice to look at, they're nice to go to, but if you're a real true football fan, I think you prefer something like the Orange Bowl. Like, I mean, just like look. I mean, would you compare Lambeau Field with the new stadium in Dallas and say you'd rather go to Dallas Stadium? Yeah, it's pretty, but if you're a hardcore football fan, I think you want to go to Lambeau Field and see a game there.
I see what you mean. Yeah,
you don't
makes
think
sense.
Yes,
because it's a football shrine.
Yes.
Anybody that's ever been to Lambeau Field, and I've worked games over at Lambeau, it's unbelievable. It really is. I mean, you're right. The amenities are what they are. But I got to tell you, though, on that very site that you have in your back, where they built Marlins Park, they have played football games there as well a couple of times. Some football games. FIU, took on Miami there last year. They had a bowl game that really didn't work out well. But they've tried to utilize some historical significance there. And bear in mind, they've done a wonderful job. I've been to Marlins Park many a times. Saw the All-Star game there. Saw the Tigers and the Brewers there on occasions. Saw a no-hitter when Henderson Alvarez beat the Detroit Tigers. And now, ironically, I'm working with Miami Marlins now, so I expect hopefully a couple of games there. So and here I am, once upon a time being part of the Detroit media, and now I'm finding myself on your end of the spectrum there, working with the team that you guys, that we can all call our own, and the way they've treated me and our publication is unbelievable. But they've done a good job I don't have a problem tearing an old stadium down as long as you redevelop it for the right reasons, like they did with the Orange Bowl. You took an old stadium and you put in a brand new stadium with two garages in it. They've done a really wonderful job redeveloping the area. The Miami Stadium, on the other hand, my goodness, that was a how do I want to say it, a war zone. You ever been to the Miami Arena? Did you ever?
Yes. I did.
As a member of the media, I got free parking to go there. I decided to pay $15 and take my equipment just to get closer to the stadium. It was that bad.
Yeah. No, I definitely remember that place, and
I do remember the old Miami Arena. Well, it's much the American Airlines Arena is much better. There's no doubt about that.
Paid $15 million, I think, for that arena with like 15 or 20 suites, and they were out of there in 5 or 10 years. That thing deserved the wrecking ball pretty quick.
Yeah,
considering that it was located where a lot of homeless people were at. It was a very dangerous area. Didn't mind going ahead, whipping a little cash to pay just to get in there so I could make sure I lived to see I-95 north again.
Well, but I kind of know what Joe's saying, and when you go to and Scott, you must see this a lot when you go to games, and a good amount of the people aren't there because they like the teams, because they like the sport. They're going there for other reasons, kind of like Joe, the whether it's a networking or hobnobbing, and it is different than being with people that are in, it's very fun to be at a game, no matter what sport, when you're there rooting on the home team and everybody else is doing the same thing.
Well, let's not kid ourselves. South Florida is an area where if you win, they'll support. Period. They've never been known to be like a Midwestern sports town or people in the Northeast they'll put in numbers no matter what. So, I think the Miami Hurricanes' success, if you stick them in the Midwest with all that success, they'd be playing in front of packed houses anywhere but where they're at. So I don't think the people in this area appreciated the greatness of the Miami Hurricanes over the years, that compared to, you take that same football team anywhere else, and all of a sudden you're selling merchandise quite a bit, and it would be a hot ticket.
Yeah.
Well, people are spoiled.
It's crazy. I mean, we talked about this last time, but I mean, looking back at it, I didn't realize at the time how spoiled I was to be a Miami Hurricane football fan. From when I was 13, 1983, when they won their first national championship, and after that, if they weren't vying for a national championship every single year, you felt let down. Like if they lost a game early on or at any point in the season, you're like, oh, there goes their national championship hopes. Most teams, and now with the Hurricanes, if they lost one game, like, okay, that's okay. I'll take a 10-2 season, or a 11-2, whatever. Then that knocked your chance. I mean, you could overcome it. I remember when they lost to the Gators one year, the opening game, they went on to win a national championship. So it wasn't necessarily a doomsday, but you felt like, it was a real downer. And like now I realize how much I took them for granted, that they would just be a perennial national championship contender.
Well, I remember the first coach I worked with was Howard Schnellenberger. I did, and he's the one who turned that program around. I don't think the university's given him his real due either. I think he should be honored a lot more with Miami. I really do. Here's a guy that took over a dormant program that nearly went broke under Lou Saban and turned it around. He brought in Jim Kelly from Pennsylvania. He was going to be. Penn State tried to recruit him as a linebacker. He wanted to, and Schnellenberger said he can play quarterback, and the history there. And then I remember the game you're talking about, Florida. I think they lost 28-3, and then they never lost another game all year, and won that championship against the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And Tom Osborne decided to go for two, and a lot of things went Miami's way that allowed the Hurricanes to get that championship. And then from there, Jimmy Johnson took over, and then the beat goes on. So Howard Schnellenberger does not get his due and respect. So when I had an opportunity to reunite with him at Florida Atlantic University, it was a really neat thing for him and I to be working together again. And the respect that we have, of course, I've had lots of photos of Howard Schnellenberger. And I had an opportunity to work with Don Shula back in the day when I was a young writer. And he's the most intimidating guy you'll ever meet. You talk to Chip Namias or anything. I can remember when Don Shula didn't like young writers, but he got to like me over time. And I remember one of my favorite Don Shula stories was once he got to like me, and it took a while, young guys are what they are. Chip Namias will tell you the same thing. But I'll never forget when the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, Chip and all, had a hot soccer game. We had the staff of the Fort Lauderdale Strikers against the media. I suffered a sprained ankle in that game, and I had to be taken out. Ended up I found myself with a bandage on and had to go get medical attention. So I ended up going ahead and I had to be the following Sunday. I was covering the Dolphins during training camp over at Biscayne College. At that time, they weren't And then I guess it went on to be St. Thomas University. Then they ended up moving up to David way down the line. And Don Shula, on a rainy day, I'll never forget, he invited myself and another writer into his office, and I told him what happened to me. He said, should I cut you or should I put you on injured reserve? And I told Coach, I'd rather you just go ahead and put me on injured reserve so I'll be a part of the team. And he really laughed pretty hard. So, good answer, by the way. And then I started asking him some questions like, why do your teams, what makes you such the type of coach you are? And he was really open once I started talking to him. It's like a young kid learning from a daddy or a father figure at that point. And the biggest lesson Coach Shula taught me was you can't get anybody to work with their weaknesses. You got to feed to their strengths. And to this day, I always took those lessons and I apply them to what I do these days. So, but Don Shula,
story.
He was an intimidator, but I wore on him after a while. He got used to me, you like anything else, you're a young guy, you have to earn your respect from a legend like him. And, knowing what I know now, I certainly be much different. Then again, aren't we all saying that to begin with? But I've learned a lot with Howard Schnellenberger through the years, Don Shula, great Chip Namias. Like I said, I know you guys don't know him, but for those of you that see my timeline on Facebook, Chip and I are really close. And again, the relationships I built during an area that you guys are watching all of this, to be a part of all this with Hank Goldberg, Sonny Hirsch, Larry Bluestein. These guys here to me are all about South Florida. You had Ed Berliner for a while. I got to know Jeff DeForest back then. I still stay in touch with these fellas. Bernie Rosen, you remember him? I think you've heard of him, right? He's a behind-the-scenes producer at Channel 4 for many years. He worked with Tony Segreto and Mark Wilson. And I got to catch up with Bernie, and he was good. Another one of the PR guys I dealt with was Harvey Green. So the history here, when I came back here and they were the Florida Marlins and the Tigers took on the Marlins over at Joe Robbie Stadium, I tell you what, when I took Ernie Harwell, the legendary Tigers broadcaster, back to the hotel, I didn't know nothing about 595. We took a longer ride until I got him to this hotel. That's how much the area had changed.
It did quite a bit.
So I'm going to ask you guys, okay, and I know I've enriched you a lot here about some of what I've done. Why don't you give me some of Ron, you've been around a long time. Give me some of your favorite moments in South Florida sports, the good old days.
I think I just remember going to a couple games. I remember, was it maybe 1979 or 1980, going to the Orange Bowl to see the Dolphins versus the Jets. And it was always a big deal when the Jets came to town. A lot of people from New York, my family, was originally from New York, and seeing the Jets and rooting against the Jets, and it was always a fun thing as a kid, just going against the Jets, hating the Jets. And now it's hating the Jets and the Patriots. But I kind of remember that. Remember going to, it was a little bit later, of course, but going to the Miami Marlins, that was a good time. And Lockhart Stadium, watching all the high school football games. Because I went Piper High School and Sunrise didn't play there, but a lot of the teams did, like Joe's team. Just good old things. And probably when you're growing up and you're old like us or old like me, the Orange Bowl is probably the biggest memory. I remember going to the Dolphin games, having some fun. Didn't go to that many, but it was a good memories.
Did you ever go to the AFC Championship game when the Dolphins beat the Jets 14-0?
I did.
Did you?
I was at that game.
You were at that game?
I was at the game.
I bought a ticket and got on the field, nearly got whacked by one of those cops at the club. I was a fan, a young guy then. I ended up buying a ticket, and they ended up winning a soggy 14-0 game.
Yeah, A.J. Dewey had 2 interceptions that game.
A.J. Dewey in the mud. Boy, that must have been some game to go to. I watched it on TV, but to be there, plus we must have been soaked. We probably didn't care.
No, I still have the poncho that I wore to that game because it was my dad's army poncho that turned into a tent. I still have that thing. That was my go-to weather gear for football games. I have it in my garage here from back then. But yeah, I was actually going to bring up that game as one of my highlights of the Orange Bowl. And then the next year, we didn't quite make it that far. I went to the Dolphins Chargers game. That was probably, even though they lost, that was probably the best football game I've ever been to. Most exciting.
You were actually at that game too?
Yeah.
Oh, they
Wow, I remember watching it on TV, the triple overtime and the whole Kelvin Williams things, and then the
hook and lateral.
Yeah, the
hook and lateral play.
The hook and lateral. That's it. Remember? Oh man, that must have been.
And then the back and forth.
Yeah, that was the kind of game.
Missed field goals. I mean, either one of them could have won on the field goals. I think Bernershka missed the field goal, and then Von Schaman missed the field goal.
Uwe Von Schaman. Yep.
The field goal.
Well, that was I don't know how it was in person, but that was the kind of game, even though the Dolphins lost and I was very upset, it was like one of those games where it was just such a great game. There weren't really losers. Even the Dolphins did lose.
Yeah, it was epic. Kellen Winslow was totally exhausted. Dan Fouts had the game of his life. They were down 24-0. The Dolphins I ended up seeing another AFC championship game. Then I was not covering the team full time, and I bought a ticket when Miami beat the Pittsburgh Steelers to go on to the Super Bowl in the AFC championship game. So it was pretty neat,
That's neat.
You got to remember, though, I'm coming from an area with the Detroit Lions where they don't make the playoffs. And when they don't, and they've only won one playoff game since 1957, and that's when they hammered the Dallas Cowboys over at the Pontiac Silverdome. And then the last time the Lions won a championship was on December 29, 1957. My birthday, 5 years before I was hatched. On my birthday. That's how I remember that. Wow.
But Scott, you're talking about that's some of the older cities or some of the cities that have a team that went where the Lions from, like the 1920s. You have all this history that goes so far back when they were wearing leather helmets.
Right.
That's something that we don't have here, but that's just an amazing thing to think about.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, think about the first coach of the Miami Dolphins. I think was George Wilson, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he played on the Lions championship team. So, and Don Shula used to be an assistant coach for the Detroit Lions until he went on to a head coach. I don't want to get depressed thinking about the Lions had Don Shula as an assistant, Bill Belichick as an assistant, Chuck Knox. All these guys went on to do something elsewhere. The Lions, well, we're not turning this into an obituary about the Detroit Lions tonight, but but you people in South Florida benefited greatly from some of our football cast-offs. But it's interesting, going to that same game with you, Joe. I didn't know you then. Of course, we probably looked a hell of a lot different. I probably weighed like 140 pounds now. Another thing that was big back in the day, too, was you had a lot of boxing at the War Memorial Auditorium in Fort Lauderdale, and you also had fights at the Diplomat Hotel as well. Yeah.
I mean, I remember as a kid, it's amazing how it's nothing like it used to be. But, back in the late 80s when I was in high school, my friends and I would get excited about, boxing. And we would talk about, when those big fights like between Hagler and Hearns and, Sugar Ray. I mean, those were big deals. Like people you would talk about that stuff. Yeah, like now, I mean, I don't know if it's because of the MMA, but like no one talks boxing anymore. I mean, like maybe once in a blue moon you see like the Pacquiao or Roy Jones, but it's not like it was in the day where you had contenders that were such big figures going out after each other. And of course, with heavyweights, I kind of missed the boat on that because by the time I was old enough to get interested in it, Ali was already, past his he was past his prime. But we got to watch Mike Tyson when I was so that was kind of although most of his fights weren't very exciting. I remember they stopped putting them on pay-per-view and putting them on HBO or Showtime because they would last about like 45 seconds.
Right.
Well, you know what? Amazingly enough, though, Angelo Dundee was a good friend of mine back in the day, and I got to know him really well. So I ended up meeting Sugar Ray Leonard over at the Allen Park Gym in North Miami, and that's where I met Muhammad Ali as well. And Angelo was, so he obviously South Florida, whether people realize it or not, was a really big area. Of course, Ali and Sonny Liston was over at the Miami Convention Center. So don't underestimate the significance of boxing in South Florida, because that was a really big mecca back then. Detroit, Las Vegas, and they held a lot of great fights on
Right.
Miami Beach.
You're right. But Joe, I think you made a good point because I think if you talk to younger people, when you talk about fights, they think about MMA, because maybe it's more, I don't know, they find it more exciting to watch. There's more going on. There's it's not just boxing, there's different like mixed martial arts. So I think you might be right about that. I don't know.
I could just be looking at it through my, my younger eyes, but even stuff like tennis was more exciting then. You got like guys like Connors and McEnroe, like they were just personalities that you wanted to watch because of their personalities. Nowadays you have very good players, but they're not those like personalities that they used to be. And that may be what's going on with the boxing is like to get people interested, you need to hype them up. And like, guys like Sugar Ray Leonard and Hagler and Hertz, they were all like personalities.
Yeah, but you know what? Let me tell you, you talk about tennis. The first ladies tennis tournament that I ever saw, I was actually working in Detroit radio. I just moved down here to Florida at the time. They had the Linda Carter Maybelline tennis tournament out of Deer Creek Country Club. And I remember Chris Everett, Andrea Yeager were there. And it was pretty interesting. At that time, ladies tennis players, they were a little on the snobby side. So if you try to ask them questions, they thought that they could answer you in a very rude way. But then you bring up the fact that you had golf tournaments back in the day here as well. And of course, PGA golf has always been a history dating from Inverary to Eagle Trace all the way up. But then you talk about men's tennis. I remember the photo I had with Jimmy Connors was actually at the Nastasi Invitational is what it was, over in Miami at the Hamptons Invitational. That was supposed to be a 2 out of 3 exhibition. And as it turns out, Nastasi was such a shrewd businessman, Ilya Nastasi, that they made it 3 out of 5. And these guys were complaining. I'm thinking, Ilya's smart. He went out there and said, I can get 5 sets out of these guys. And it was a good tournament. I had a chance to meet Bjorn Borg there, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Jimmy Connors, a little rough around the edges. I always idolized him as a kid until I got to know him. Then I had a different opinion of him. But I got a photo with the guy, so anybody that thinks I got along with him on a microphone, right, let the pictures do the run amok, you know what I mean? And the pictures are worth 1,000 words, as they were when I got a photo with Muhammad Ali with the kiss by the jaw, and Sugar Ray Leonard gave me the same courtesy. See, this gene I have here, a jaw, I've had lots of people take a crack at it, and I'm still talking.
That's funny. You're talking about tennis, and I think they've done a really good job at the Miami Open since they moved it to Hard Rock Stadium. I mean, tennis is such an international sport now. Whether in men's tennis, it's Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, and the women's side, I know you still have Serena Williams, but there's a lot of international players. It's a different sport, but it's when you watch it in person, it's really exciting. And I think they did a good job moving it over from Key Biscayne. It's actually a much better site than it was in Key Biscayne, I think, at the stadium. People say you put it at a football stadium, but when they put center court in the stadium, it's really cool. It actually comes out pretty cool.
But Ron, you were right. Okay, Stephen Ross has done an unbelievable job putting his money into that stadium. But let me tell you what, okay, here's a guy that obviously from the University of Michigan. He's a University of Michigan guy. Okay, had to tie that.
There you go.
And what he did is Miami got a Super Bowl out of what he had done. He's a sharp businessman. The Miami Dolphins headquarters are going to be there. They're moving him out of Davie before long. They'll be over on site. So he's done such a masterful job developing that site. And Miami-Dade and all of South Florida should be thankful that Stephen Ross has poured a lot of his money and time into their area to make it a worthwhile environment. And of course, for a lot of you folks that haven't heard today, the Miami Dolphins will have a new starting quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa will be the new starter.
Wait, what? What?
You didn't hear that?
Oh, you didn't hear?
Really?
Yeah. Ryan Fitzpatrick's going to be on second string.
Based
Tua
on what?
Tagovailoa will be starting in 2 weeks when Miami goes into their bye week. So
that's weird.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, guys?
Well,
Joe hasn't heard yet, but
Fitzpatrick probably had like the game of his life the week before last. I mean, he put up Dan Marino numbers in that game. The last game, he did pretty good. I mean, the first half he did really good. Second half, they didn't need to do well because they were up 21-0 in the first half. So I'm a little bit surprised because, unless they're just going to give up on this season, where they're seeing something in practice that that we don't know about. Because why wouldn't what I wondered in the last two games was when they were up as big as they were 2 weeks ago, why didn't they put Tua in for the second half or the fourth quarter to see what he could do? Last game, they knew they were going to win that game. It wasn't close. Why not put him in early in the game? They put him to mop up the last series when all that he had to do was hand the ball off. So, given that they haven't had a preseason this season, where he would normally get some game time,
right?
I don't understand that. Like they had the perfect opportunity to put him in there to see what he could do, and Fitzpatrick's playing really well. Like if I'm a Dolphin player, I'm not sure what to think about this. I might think, look, why would you go away from the guy who's winning for you with a guy who hasn't done anything yet? I mean, I can understand if Fitzpatrick was doing really bad, then do a change since he's going to be the future. But I don't know.
Well, here's the deal.
I was shocked.
I am, but I'm not. I thought that Tua was going to sit a little bit longer because of his injury history. They must feel that he's healed now and he's ready to physically play. I thought he'd hold the clipboard a little bit longer. They're 3-3. I know Fitzpatrick has in 6 games hasn't even hit the 1,000-yard mark, so he's a very streaky quarterback. And if you're going to go ahead and make a change like this, you do it during the bye week, so you have 2 weeks to get him ready. You don't do it with a week to go. So I understand the logic somewhat, but they think that they could make a run at 3-3. He's more mobile. He's a playmaker. Who knows? For all I know, they may be getting fans back, so you can put some people in the stands too. Although you will never have 100% capacity, but maybe they feel he is ready. I don't know. I'm a little surprised that he's not sitting longer. But if you're going to do it, you have a bye week, so therefore you get everybody ready for the change. And I think Ryan Fitzpatrick knew it was coming, so it wasn't a big deal.
I just don't understand if they were going to do that. Why not ease him in? Why not put him in? To say, you said you didn't have a preseason. If they did have a preseason, he would have had game experience, against other defenses. This doesn't make sense that they would do it this way. But it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if this is a decision that's actually being made by the coaching staff, or if it's coming down from on high from Stephen Ross.
Well, you know what? There you go.
Good point.
Now you're on to something there, Joe. I wouldn't be surprised if Stephen Ross and Hire, or Stephen Ross and some of his other people are telling Brian Flores, maybe he might be ready, because if all else fails, you go back to Fitzpatrick and he can step in at any time too. He's really the best insurance policy on the planet. That's for
true. Well, Scott, I think you had a good point, because I anticipated remember, the bye week was moved. I anticipated that maybe bye week, I think it was going to be week 11. So maybe if the team was really not doing good and out of the playoffs, he would have played, the last several games. But now they're really aren't. They're second place in the AFC East. I mean, they're not out of it by any stretch of the imagination. So, Joe, you might be right. It was just, a lot of people were excited and to get that. But I was just kind of wondering why now. Yeah. Well, but you're right with the bye. You're right, Scott.
You got to remember, though, a lot of things have happened positive in this area in sports recently. The Panthers got into the playoffs, or at least they were playing a little bit later, so there was a little bit of hockey excitement. What the Miami Marlins have done here in the short season, they got into the playoffs, and they didn't look good doing it. Miami Heat made a run all the way to the NBA Finals until they came up short. So you've had some success, and now the Miami Dolphins are trying to get into some of that South Florida buzz as well. We'll see whether that bites them or not. But the lack of a preseason, would he have been ready to play in the preseason? I don't think so anyways. We're talking October versus August at the time. So maybe he's had time to feel a little bit. and get acquainted. In fact, I don't think their offensive line, from what I hear, is not overly that great. Makes me wonder why you'd put him in then, but you never know. It's hard to tell.
But Scott and Joe, isn't it a lot of pressure for a young player because the expectations are astronomical on him? So,
right,
to put him in the way the team is now, I mean, it's like unless he's off the charts, people are going to start complaining.
It's funny. Like these days, it seems like teams are more prone to put their new quarterbacks in right away. I mean, look at Cincinnati with Joe Burrow, and last year with or whatever Baker's Mayfield was. I mean, but back in the day, like Dan Marino, like even though they had no really decent quarterback at all, they had David Woodley. If there was ever a time that you would throw in your quarterback in, it would be then. But he didn't start right away. He rode the bench until I think there was an injury and he came in and then he never looked back because he started doing so well. But
Justin Herbert starting for the Chargers right away. But yeah, I remember. Yeah. Hey, you want your biggest example? What about Aaron Rodgers sitting behind Brett Favre?
Well, but that's a good reason. That was a good reason. That was a good reason.
Right.
I mean, there were a lot of
more patient.
I mean, hindsight's 2020, and obviously that worked out fantastic for them. But I'm sure there was a lot of Packers fans that were not so sure about getting rid of Favre and putting Aaron Rodgers in. Just like when Peyton Manning was still with the Colts. Yeah, like, okay, he doesn't have that many years left, but he's really good. We're going to give him up for Andrew Luck, and look how that turned out. I think if you asked Colt fans now, they would have taken the last couple of years of Peyton Manning's career over having Andrew Luck, who didn't do anything for them.
No, I agree. Well, guys, I think when you put in somebody like you have a risk. You can end up with a Joe Burrows, but you can also end up with a Josh Rosen situation, who apparently was, could be a great quarterback. Arizona threw him in, and, we know what's happened to him ever since. Now he's a backup on the Bucs. I think he might be third string on the Bucs. So
developmental, but that's true. That's a good point, Ron. Josh Rosen's situation is unfortunate because, number one, Arizona picked him with 10th overall, and then they ended up landing Kyler Murray. The Dolphins traded to get him, thinking that he would be their next. But again, he comes into a bad situation. Now he's with Tampa, where he does have time to develop, and Tom Brady's in the latter part of his career. So that's a good spot for him. Lots of times when you have the head coach and the offensive coordinator, you can't expect the quarterback to be successful unless there's stability in the key areas. And I think Josh Rosen is just a victim of bad luck. He really, really is. No,
I mean, but I don't know if that was necessarily because they rushed him. I mean, the NFL draft is littered with first-round quarterback busts who just never panned out in the NFL. And then you get guys like Tom Brady who are taken in the 6th round who become greatest of all time. But back then when he started, Drew Bledsoe was supposed to be like the savior, and then he gets hurt, and then they never looked back.
Sure, it's a good point.
We could load a whole show here about number one quarterbacks that are a bust, first round quarterbacks. But I don't view Josh Rosen as one of those. I think he's just one of those situations where he was just in a couple of tough situations, and I'm hoping Josh Rosen does well. But then you want to validate what you said, though, Joe. Talk about Joe Montana, who was drafted in the 3rd round by the San Francisco 49ers. How did that work out? Okay. Yeah. So you don't have to have your franchise quarterback in the 1st round. It's evidence to prove.
Yeah.
I guess it's just we want to, with the Tua situation, it's a little bit unique that to follow up Joe's point, they don't have to rush him along unless he's healthy, unless he's ready to go. So I guess obviously they know more than we do, but we'll just have to see how this pans out.
So Joe, let's talk about some of your favorite moments in South Florida sports over the years. I mean, we've talked about a few of them, but why don't you go ahead? And I know Ron's mentioned his. Why don't you talk about a few that stand out?
Well, I mean, definitely a lot of them are hurricane games. so, some of them I actually went to, some of them I just watched on TV. But like, back in obviously '83 was great, but then they had a down, period. I mean, for any other team, it would have been an awesome time. But '84, they lost like a couple games, and then they didn't win the national championship. '85, they had that disappointment in the Fiesta Bowl, lost to Penn State. But then in '86 and '87, they were playing like Oklahoma, who was also, that was like their rival. And I mean, it was, and I mean, that was exciting. I mean, for a team whose actual rival was like Florida State and Florida, I mean, Oklahoma, a team from a completely different conference, was basically their arch nemesis, because they were like, if Miami wasn't like vying for the national championship, then Oklahoma was.
Right.
And like just seeing those teams play each other, back in the late '80s, and be able to play a national championship game at home in the Orange Bowl. I mean, how many teams get to play their national championship game in their home stadium? And Miami got to do that more than one,
right.
3 times. They did in '83, '87, and '91. I didn't get to the '87 game. Did I get to the '87 game? I don't think I did. I went to the '91 game. I think that was when they played the Cornhuskers. But I mean, whether I was going there or just watching, I mean, that was obviously a huge highlight, and a big bonding experience with my brother. My big brother, we used to go to. We had season tickets for the not only the Hurricanes, but for the Dolphins, and he went with me to those AFC Championship game and the Chargers divisional playoff game that we lost in the Orange Bowl. So that was definitely good times. And then obviously later in the not so much '80s, but in the '90s, when we were battling against the New York Knicks, or the Heat was battling against the New York Knicks in the playoff series. Went to those games in the old Miami arena. That was some fun times. And actually, I'm not big into hockey anymore, but I got into it when I was in Boston and became a Bruins fan. And then when I came back, and the Marlins were, I'm not the Marlins, the Panthers were in that playoff run where they were throwing the plastic wraps on the ice. I went to the Flyers series. Didn't make it to any of the games in the finals, because by that time it was hard to get a ticket. But we went to the playoff games that led up to that and had a good time going to those. And then the Marlins. Did I go into any of the 90s? I don't think I went to any of the 97 games, but in 2003 I went to the San Francisco series. I was sitting actually behind home plate when Jeff Conine threw the ball home, and I forget who he got out, but it was a huge play that helped them win that series.
Oh, I know what game you're talking about. The one where Pudge Rodriguez.
Yeah.
I was at that game actually against the Giants.
That's funny.
I was at that game right in front of me in the press box. It was
I usually didn't have seats that good, but for some reason I was able to get them for that playoff game, and we just happened to be, my wife and I went to the game, and we happened to be behind home plate, and I mean, I was like, what an awesome game to have seats behind the plate when the game came down to that play.
Yeah, I didn't know I had a credential for that game until my editor said, by the way, you didn't know you were a credential for this? And then I raced down the turnpike so fast, I made it there by the third or fourth inning, got my credential in there, and then got acclimated. And before long, I was getting dosed by champagne. So,
yeah.
So, no, I'm with you. That was an unbelievable game. I've seen a lot of games over the years. That was just tremendous.
And that was an awesome game.
We went to a bunch of the we went to a couple of the Cub ALCS games. That was
really
fun. We didn't get to the World Series games because, again, by that time it was hard to buy a ticket. But we went to the Cubs ALCS games. So that was definitely fun to go see. That whole entire season was a different vibe because they put that team together. Like, it wasn't just, it was in '97. you felt cheated because they just paid for that team, and then
Right.
I mean, I remember shopping for memorabilia afterwards, and like while that memorabilia was still for sale with the players' names and everything on it, like they got rid of like most of the team, and you're like,
I remember.
you know, like it was bittersweet because you knew that it was one and done. That team was gone.
Well, it's a fire sale.
Yeah. Whereas in 2003, I mean, they stuck around. I mean, they didn't have the same luck the next year, but you know that team just came together. And I remember like Dontrell Willis, like that was exciting. He had like 10 wins in a row, and like he was such a he was such a compelling figure to watch.
The 1997 team, by the way, was led by Jim Leland, and Wayne Hines tore it apart is what he did. I remember that real well.
But I mean, he didn't just tear it apart though. But I mean, they basically paid for that team.
Well,
I mean, it's not like they built it from their farm system up. I mean, they just spent a lot of money to get big players, and then once they won, they just dumped them all. Which
fire sale, man.
Yeah,
fire sale. No, you're right.
And unfortunately, that's the same thing that's been happening with ever since. I mean, it's hard for me. I mean, it's hard for any fan in South Florida to really get too attached to them because you don't know how long they're going to stay together as a team. But a few years ago, I was really upset because I mean they had some really good players. I mean, I understand why they got rid of Stan. He had a huge salary. But guys like Christian Yelich, they got rid for nothing. And then he goes on to be like, player of the year.
I know.
That didn't sit well. It's like they just got rid of people just to get rid of people.
Well, at Joe Robbie Stadium, I had the good fortune to connect with Sammy Sosa again. And I worked with Sammy Sosa in 1987, I believe 87. When I was the director of public relations for the Gastonia Rangers. And I'll never forget when Sharon Panozzi, I believe the Cubs PR person, I told her I wanted to talk to Sammy. She wouldn't let me. And I said, listen, Sharon, let me explain to you. I'm not the regular reporter that you would normally think. I was his director of public relations in Gastonia, North Carolina. And, I did what you did. So what I did right in front of this woman said, hey, Sammy, how you doing? And then he looked at me with this big old wide smile that you can never imagine. I said, all right, Sharon, now do you believe me? And she saw the look. I got a one-on-one interview with him the next day in the clubhouse.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was. But I worked with Sammy back in the day then. But, when you talk about things here, and you guys probably appreciate it more than I do. I've covered a few Orange Bowl games, but you guys happen to be around for a lot of great Orange Bowl games. What was it like for both of you to know that you got that Miami, between the Orange Bowl parade and the festivities, and now they have a basketball game linked to it, to be around such a premier event year in, year out, knowing full well that was one of the best bowl games out of the major ones that occurred on New Year's Day.
Well, to me, it was always it was always a big deal. I mean, you knew there was going to be a great game. I mean, you knew it was top flight thing, and that's the one thing about the area is even at the time there weren't many teams. You always had big events coming. You always, Orange Bowl, and think of all the Super Bowls that have been in South Florida. I think they had more Super Bowls than any other city up to this point. So there were always big events. You might not always be rooting for the teams in those events. Fortunately, the Canes were in a lot of them, but say, you see all these Super Bowls. No, the Dolphins weren't in a single one of them that were played here, but they were still big events.
Yeah, I covered my first two Super Bowls here in Miami. Or I covered two Super Bowls. Super Bowl 33 was the first one. Of course, 33 is my lucky number. And I covered another Super Bowl. I mean, the first one I had was the Denver Broncos, Atlanta Falcons, and the next one I had was Indianapolis against New Orleans. And then I proceeded to cover two more, one up in Jacksonville between the Patriots and the Philadelphia Eagles, and then the Steelers and the Arizona Cardinals. But yeah, I covered a couple Super Bowls.
Well, Scott, when do you think, if and when, will there be a home team Super Bowl? Kind of like you're talking about the Canes and the Orange Bowl. Do you think it's possibly this year? Or you think it's going to be down the road? You don't think so, huh?
Wait, the Dolphins? The Dolphins in the Super Bowl?
Well, it's in Tampa this year.
I thought it was in Hard Rock this year.
No. Going into the year,
That
a
was
lot of
last year.
people thought, like Ron is alluding to, okay, that Tampa could get there under Brady. I don't know. I have my doubts about it. I know it was wishful thinking on Tom's part. Minnesota nearly pulled it off a year ago or 1 or 2 years ago, but it didn't quite play out. So that's a good question. I'm not so sure it's going to happen. I think the closest that's ever happened was when the 49ers played at Stanford Stadium right down the road in Palo Alto. But other than that, I don't foresee it. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I don't think so either. But back in the day, I remember we had so many because it was basically we were on a rotation of Southern California, New Orleans, and Miami. And that was pretty much it. We just rotated between those three cities, and then someone got the idea that, hey, we can use this as an incentive for teams to have new stadiums built in their cities. And then they started giving it to cities like Minnesota and New York. You're going to Super Bowls when it's 30 degrees outside. I don't know.
Detroit got one too. Yeah, you're right. I mean, they incentivized it. But part of the problem that you had here, though, in the area was Joe Robbie Stadium started to get outdated, and they needed to they did it. By their standards, they did. And Stephen Ross, I'm thinking Donald Ross right up the road. Just kidding, guys. There's a little Ross connection. Stephen Ross took it upon himself to upgrade the stadium, and they did get one. And they probably positioned themselves to get back in that rotation because, let's face it, as brand new of a stadium as it was, it does need a little TLC. Look what you've got here because of it. Stephen Ross did unbelievable things here to get him back in the rotation.
You know what I think it really was? I don't know if it was so much the amenities, but what that Super Bowl, I forget which one it was, but it was like about 10 years ago or so, and it rained. And then, God forbid, because it almost never rains in January and February in Miami. But on this particular occasion, it rained, and it was like, oh no, we can't have rain at a football game. Like, and this harkens back to my argument before that the people that are going to these things, especially Super Bowl, they're not there to watch the game. They're there just for the events, because If you had a game, you watch those games at Lambeau Field or Soldier Stadium, and people are out there taking their shirts off in 20-degree freezing weather. I mean, that to me, that's your sports fan. That's who football is made for, and that's who I like to see in a game, not people who are sipping martinis, wearing their $500 pair of loafers. They don't want to get wet, so they'll move into their luxury suite if it starts to rain in the stadium, if it's not covered. Because I remember when they were talking about doing the additions to the stadium, and they were talking about, we're not going to be able to get a Super Bowl unless we put covers on it. I'm like, to me, that's ridiculous. I mean, football is meant to be played outdoors. You're in South Florida. To put a cover over the stadium, to me, is criminal. So as much as I like upgrading, I think the cover they put on there, I don't like it. I think it's horrendous.
Yeah, I'm not.
Just my opinion.
Well, no, I'm not really.
I mean, what do you think the fans of Lambeau Field would say if they want to put a cover over that stadium?
Well,
they would lynch anybody who even suggested that.
Well, it would never happen.
That would not go over.
No,
you are right.
But Minnesota, though.
I mean, you can't really compare it because, I mean, obviously that place is a football cathedral.
Right.
But, I mean, the point is, I mean, that's like the poster child of, that's how football is meant to be played, in the outdoors. I mean, it's probably one of the only stadiums that far up north that doesn't have well, actually, I guess there's a lot that don't have a dome, but that gets that cold and doesn't have. I don't know. To me, you don't play football indoors or undercover. You just don't.
No, I understand. Well, because I was saying, because when if you think about it, it's always a part of the elements. Even if you're a Dolphin fan, you look at the schedule. Oh no, we got to go to New England in December, or we got to go to Buffalo in December, and you're like, wow, there's going to be the elements. It's going to be a factor. Yeah. It makes it exciting. It does.
Yeah. Well, one of the scarring experiences as a youth was watching the snowplow come on the field during during a Patriot game where they
Yep.
cleared a little spot for them to kick the field goal in the snow, and then
I
there was
remember
this
that.
Oh yeah, the snowplow
snowplow game.
game. Yeah, Don Shula blew a gasket over that one.
Yeah.
You're talking about a guy like me, though. Bear in mind that saw the Lions games at Tiger Stadium. So
Okay.
and of course I've covered
In the
games
snow.
over at Soldier Field during the middle of the winter. So I know exactly what you're talking about when the elements creep into play. When I would cover games at Soldier Field, I would have my pair of hiking boots with 3 pairs of socks underneath, and I would be on the field for the last 7 minutes with the wind swirling in from Lake Michigan. And I'll tell you what, you didn't need to feel like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I felt like Scott Morganroth the Red-Chinned Motor Mouth. Because
But it was all,
I can imagine.
but it was all worth it though, because I mean, let's put it this way. I wouldn't trade my experience in that 82 AFC Championship game, putting my poncho on in the torrential rain, for being in a covered stadium, and it wouldn't have been the same experience. It just
I agree. Oh, no doubt about that. No,
You are right.
What the elements are. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you go to Jacksonville, they don't have a cover over their building. Tampa doesn't have it. Miami obviously jazzed it up with the way they did it, but to me, it's like a superficial half cover, which makes no sense.
And honestly, I don't think they would have done it unless the NFL had forced them to do it. And it's because of that Super Bowl where it rained, and they're like, hey, remember that Super Bowl in Miami it rained? We can't have that again. They better do something about it. And I remember
You are right.
I remember at the time when they're saying that, I'm like, this is crazy. We're going to put a cover over the stadium just so that once every 5 or 7 years we could have a Super Bowl here, and the rest of the time, like, why don't you put up like a temporary one when they want to put the Super Bowl on, and then just take it down the rest of the time?
Yeah, I don't know how feasible that is. You got to remember that when you look at some of the newer stadiums, even Jerry's place out in Arlington, you can cover it up if you have to. So they are more retractable situations. I see your point. Okay, being an old school guy, the elements are always a big part of what you ended up doing. But again, nowadays they're trying to bring in big crowds. I had a chance. I got a piece of this Super Bowl with Rudy Reyes, where I covered an event with him downtown when we did some work for him for the Rude Dog show. And then I ended up doing another event with Candy over at the Diplomat Hotel with the Taste of the NFL. It was pretty neat, But you know what? Nowadays, when you go to these events, for me, it's about making contacts, getting guests, seeing some old friends, and so forth. But you're right. Politics play into it, and if you want a big piece of that action, the NFL's king of the castle in it.
Yeah.
And of course, you talk about new stadiums. You got SoFi Stadium in LA. Southern California is going to be hosting one. Allegiant Field, Allegiant Stadium out in Las Vegas, and that's a new wave that they want to make sure that these games here are decided in the air conditioning and nothing else.
Well, but make no mistake, it's because they want to charge a huge amount of money for their tickets,
right?
And the type of fans that can afford those huge amounts are the type of people who aren't going to sit outside in the weather. They're the ones that want to have, make sure that their $500 loafers are nice and dry if it happens to rain, and they can go inside in their luxury boxes or their club level, bar areas. I mean, yeah, I get it. When they shifted to that clientele away from what the fans were back, when they were in Orange Bowl,
true,
they did have to do that, but they unfortunately they priced the experience out for a lot of people, because I remember, I remember that ticket for that championship game was like $18.
Wow.
And a normal ticket for a regular game was like $13. Now I know there's like differences in inflation, but the first season when they were in Joe Robbie Stadium, I remember we got season tickets for about $300. So tickets were about $30 a game. I can't even imagine what they are now.
Oh, well, that's true.
Joe, you're absolutely right. And I was thinking, if you look at the Super Bowl, look at the change in the halftime show. Now it's such a spectacular event. What's going to be in the halftime show? Who's going to be on it? If you look at like old footage in Super Bowl I, it was a marching band. It was halftime. It was a football game. Now it's this extravaganza, and people pay more attention who's singing at the halftime show than who's at the game. And what star is sitting in the stands and all that kind of stuff.
What commercials run?
Well, let me tell you this. I can tell you right now, Lucas Oil Field, Indianapolis is a place, so they'd probably hold it. But they take into consideration hotels as well. And
right.
a place that
I thought they already did that.
Right. No, I'm just saying, when you talk about indoor climates, they judge a lot of it by hotel accommodations, whether the places can hold a big event. And State Farm Stadium out in Arizona, that's part of the climate. But the one thing I know that you guys talk about the halftime shows, when I was covering the game, I enjoyed the halftime shows because I never watched them. I use it as a 30 to 40-minute break to network and talk to my colleagues while you guys are watching it on TV. And that was a break for me because of the intensity that would ensue afterwards about what I had to do working the game itself, per se. So I can appreciate where you're coming from, having seen it on both sides. And you know what? Unless I don't even bother watching the halftime show anymore. I really don't, frankly, care. But I can see your point of view. So when we put this show in perspective, what are some closing thoughts about the good old days in South Florida sports? Because I know we've sprinkled in a little of the new, which is good because we're talking about eras here, and trying to plug in the old, because South Florida has a much bigger, rich sporting history than most people realize it. And once again, I reiterate my point. Once upon a time, and I love the once upon a time theme here, okay, we only had 2.5 teams. I don't know if or two. You had the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, you had the Miami Hurricanes, and the Miami Dolphins. Basically, two.
Right. Well, Scott, maybe I'll take that first. I think the good old days is always a matter of perspective. It's what you grow up with and what you watch and love. Because if you talk to other people in South Florida that are a little bit older than us, they say, well, we mean the good old days. Good old days is the 72 Dolphins. There's nothing else with the 72 Dolphins.
Right.
Fortunately, unfortunately, maybe we weren't either, a little too young to appreciate, how the Dolphins were in 72. So we gravitate to the years with Dan Marino and that kind of thing. And you could do that with any sport. So, when you're old and crotchety, you always point to your good old days. Now, if you talk to somebody, that's a little bit younger than us, they might have other good old days. But I think we're always going to hold on to our good old days.
What about you, Joe?
I would agree and disagree. Well, one, yes, the 72, that period was definitely better in terms of the Dolphins. I wouldn't say our days are better than those days. But what I'm saying is our days are better than what we have today. Because, obviously the Dolphins in the early 70s, my older brother and my dad they had season tickets to those. I didn't get to because I was only like 2 years old back in the heyday. But my dad used to take my brother to those games, and they went entire like stretches of a couple of years without seeing the Dolphins lose at home. Talk about spoiled. As a Hurricane fan, we had the same experience where we went like 56 games without seeing them lose at home. So I wouldn't compare everything to that era per se, but comparing my area of watching the Hurricanes and the Dolphins to today's era, right. It's not even a comparison. I feel bad for the kids today who are Dolphins and Hurricanes fans because, even if they weren't winning, the first year with Marino, he set all sorts of records and they went to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, they didn't get back to the Super Bowl. But, in a 3-year span, they went to the Super Bowl against the Redskins and then the Super Bowl against the 49ers. And then you had years of exciting football, even if they weren't winning. You got to see really exciting football. These memories stick out in my head, like watching them play the Jets and the game was like 54-51 or 50, whatever it was. It was exciting to watch whether they won or lost because now it's like watching paint dry. It hasn't been exciting for a long time because there's no consistency. Like there's a different quarterback, there's a different coach every year. Back then you had stability. You had Shula and you had Marino for years. And now it's like a revolving door of I saw a statistic about the number of different quarterbacks that Miami's had since Marino. It was just like some staggering different, staggering number of quarterbacks they've had over that time. And then with the Hurricanes, like I said before, I mean, that's not even a comparison to now because they haven't won a ACC championship, in all the years they've been in the ACC. Whereas back when, they were winning national championships like every other year. If they weren't winning it, they were vying for it. They were, between them and Florida State, they were probably in the top 5 every single year throughout the entire 80s and a good portion of the 90s. So, I feel bad for the kids growing up today that are living in South Florida that don't have that. They don't see those they don't even have the rivalries anymore between Miami, Florida, and Miami and Notre Dame. It's a shame. I think it's a shame.
You make a great point. Okay, first of all, back in those days that you're referring to, Miami was a top-rated independent. Okay, if you take top-rated teams and you put them in a conference, they're going to struggle. Even Penn State has struggled in the Big Ten because all of a sudden they develop film on you, they recruit in your area, and the familiarity factor is different. Miami Hurricanes were a top-notch independent. You also had the Big 12 tie-in to the Orange Bowl as well. Yeah. So by having an independent team, which Miami was always at the top of that group.
And Florida State.
Right, and Florida
and
State,
Notre Dame.
You're almost assured, and Notre Dame, you're always sure that they were going to get here against a Big 12 opponent. And back then, Big 12 was strong because you had Nebraska and you had Oklahoma, and for a time, Texas joined it later on. So you always kind of knew where your independent bowl tie-ins are, just like you would be for the Big Ten going to the Rose Bowl. You always knew where those tie-ins were. So playing as an independent in a conference, that's why the Hurricanes have struggled mightily. When they left the Big East to transition to the ACC, they're trying to get that back, and they haven't been able to do it. Now, my situation here, where I feel very good about doing a broadcast of both of you guys, is I come from an area with 4 major sports. Okay, I did. I had an opportunity in the NHL, NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball my whole life. I've had it my whole life. Now, I came to South Florida with nothing, okay? Miami Dolphins, Strikers, and Miami football, but it was my learning ground is what it was to become a professional in the media, and I had stuff to work with then. I really did. Hey, if you would have told me I'd be covering Miami Dolphins in 1982, I thought we both were out of our mind. What little old Don Shula. And then learning from the Strikers was good. It taught me to be a professional. Even covering the Fort Lauderdale Yankees was a good experience for me because I became a beat writer for a minor league team and got to be in there day in and day out and be with the team and learn a lot of what was going on. It was my training ground here. Then supplement it with the Florida Derby, okay? Then you supplement it with spring training, whereas I alluded to in Broward and Palm Beach County and a little bit of Dade, Miami. So for me, it was great. And then I carried that over into Tampa, but did a lot of high school stuff as well here as I did anywhere. So when I put everything in perspective here and we put a bow on this broadcast, you're right. I mean, the eras are what they are. But I think the biggest thing that stands out for me as we compare the different areas about where sports is in South Florida today is some of the people I met. And I know I dropped a lot of names that the Sonny Hirsches, which you guys can relate to. Tony Segretos, Chris Myers, they all started here, and we were all able to build our professional life, and we had to go somewhere else. And some of those sports writers, it was great to see a lot of these guys move on to good things. And of course, I'm forever grateful for South Florida because of the people I met early on in my lifetime and some of the friendships that I've maintained over the years. So that's why this has been such a great broadcast. How we can reminisce about the fact I would have never known in private conversation, Joe, that you and I were both at the same game, a 14-0 soaking by the Dolphins over the Jets over the Orange Bowl. Little do people realize I interviewed O.J. Simpson at the Orange Bowl for a Monday night game, and he was a lot nicer to me than what was subsequently happened down the road. And I'm not getting into that, but you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
So, but all in all, I think it's been a lot of fun. Game 1 of the World Series tonight between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Tampa Bay Rays. And I got to tell you another thing before Candy and I do No Limits tonight. I actually had a chance to see a World Series game Game 3 of the 1968 World Series when Earl Wilson was on the hill for the Tigers. They lost that game and would subsequently interview spend time with my World Series hero, Mickey Lolich. So,
Wow.
we talk about World Series. Ron knows that I did a broadcast with Mickey Lolich. And for those of you that look at my Facebook page, Mickey Lolich is right there with me, my childhood idol. But I think the one thing that I can tell you, and that you're right, Joe, that people in this area haven't been able to appreciate Major League Baseball because the winning has been temporary. I do believe in my mind Derek Jeter will change the culture of that as a great manager in Don Mattingly. And this is a team that's built for sustainability. So I think for a lot of you Marlin fans that are wondering what the future holds, I do believe it's very, very bright.
I hope so. I just hope that when
so.
they get in the past, what the history would always be, they would get a young player like a Miguel Cabrera, and when they were cheap, when they had a low for a low salary before their arbitration time would be coming, they would use them, and as soon as they had to pay out the big bucks to keep them, it was gone. You're out of here.
But
that always used to frustrate me because then the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox of the world, or the St. Louis Cardinals, places where they had big fan bases that would support their team, would pick up these players, and then we would have to start over again from our farm system with new players. And it was just very frustrating as a Marlins fan to have to deal with that. So that most recently when they had Kristen Yelich, who wasn't making a lot of money, and they just get rid of him for seemingly nothing in a trade. It's like, it's like, do you want, are you really committed to this?
Yeah, the rich get richer. I can understand that. I think that when people look at the Tampa Bay Rays tonight, they're going to realize that this team was built with, and Don Mattingly talked about that to me today, and the rest of us, that, the Tampa Bay Rays have the model that a lot of the smaller market teams have to. You're right. They would let them go. They try to get a good haul of prospects, hope a couple of them would stick out. But that's just the economics in baseball. And yet I can understand the frustration in an area where you have never had a real guy that you can say started and finished career one spot. There, and many of the bigger markets, we can say that we did have those type of guys. So, so I can totally appreciate where you're coming from. But I think South Florida has a much bigger, richer sports history than most people give it credit for. I mean, you have a race that leads up to the Triple Crown with the Florida Derby. Don't sell that one short. The Florida Derby is an event that people look forward to, the Orange Bowl, and, of course, some of the other ones. And now you have all four major sports. So any other things you guys want to add?
No, I've had a good time tonight.
What about you, Joe?
I just remembered it because I had during COVID I taped or DVR'd the game because they were playing old time football games. I had a good time watching it. But back in 1985, when the Dolphins played the Bears in the Orange Bowl during what would have been the Bears' perfect season if they had won that game, and I remember like it was yesterday, being in high school and the buzz about it was like a Super Bowl. I mean, it really was like a Super Bowl. And, I remember the Dolphins took a full page ad out, or at least the Miami Herald did a full page ad. The Chicago Tribune did a full page ad. You don't see teams, you don't see that going on these days. I have not felt an experience like that wasn't a Super Bowl since then. I don't know what it is, but I was watching it on TV the other day, and it was kind of cool because they had some of the older players like Bo Camper and Nat Moore doing commentary during the game, what was going on. It was kind of fun to relive that during the off season.
Well, maybe enough you talk about Nat Moore, but when I was covering the Dolphins back then, I wrote a story on Nat Moore, Mark Clayton, Tony Nathan, Mark Duper. Those are some unbelievable guys.
Yeah.
I've never got along well with Dan Marino.
Oh, yeah.
Him and I just didn't click very well.
Yeah.
But for a lot of you Dolphin fans, sorry, Dan isn't a guy you're going to see me talking very good about. But that's just a personal opinion because he made some stupid, boneheaded comments at a Super Bowl when I covered his event that I thought was very distasteful. And unfortunately for me. He had a stellar career. He had one of the best releases in the world, but I think, and he's an icon in the area, but to me, I could care less about him. I was glad that John Elway did what he did, and Dan Marino didn't do what he didn't do.
Boo! Boo!
All right. Well, I know, but that's why I set it up. I'm
No.
here to get booed here in South Florida. I love it. I really love it.
It was all Terrell Davis. John Elway would have never won the Super Bowls without Terrell Davis.
I know, but
Dan Marino, if Dan Marino just had a freaking defense.
Right.
Yeah. Multiple Super Bowls. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, he did a surgical job on the Bears. And I'll tell you what, when you talk about the Miami Dolphins and the Chicago Bears, they play once every 4 years in each of their venues. That rivalry will always be measured up to what Dan Marino did to prevent the Bears from getting that perfect season. So
yeah, and that was the other cool thing is they do this a lot. Like I don't know how many guys still come out and do this, but they had a bunch of the Dolphin players from the '72 season there. Like Larry Zonka was there.
Well, they have their little reunion.
It's like the team owes its past members from the '72 season to keep that alive if they can.
Yes.
And they were able to come through.
That's a big deal. I remember that game.
In fact, during the Super Bowl here, during the Taste of the NFL, I had a chance to meet some of the Miami Dolphins, and Mercury Morris was great. I think who's the other guy? Dick Anderson. I spent time with him, and I've had a great run with the Miami Dolphins. I think about the Miami Dolphins. They're the first NFL team I ever covered, so my heart is definitely there. For Dan Marino or no Dan Marino, to me, this organization has a rich history, and they're proud of it, and more power to them. And I know that Bill Parcells was a part of it for a little while. So the Miami Dolphins to me have always been an organization I felt close to my heart. Again, now I cover lots of different teams, but I'll never forget my run in the 80s. I think that's always been great, and working with Harvey Green throughout the years. Now it's a different regime, and I move around a little bit more than I used to. But I was waiting for the boos. I set you up very well, Joe Littman. I need to get booed here. So you definitely took that really well. But with all due respect, I will say of all the quarterbacks I've ever seen, Dan Marino has the quickest release that I've ever seen, and he's a very talented quarterback. And he never took sacks because he got rid of the ball faster than anybody I've ever seen. So
well, and one thing from watching that game again during that replay, it showed like how good of a coach Shula was, because they had designed rollouts for him, and everybody knows Dan Marino wasn't exactly the most agile of runners for a quarterback, but they had designed rollouts to give him extra time to throw the ball. And and because of that, and because of his quick release, they were able to defeat the 46 defense. And I remember they were saying during the game that Ditka and Buddy Ryan were coming at like arguing with each other, because they're like, "Hey, look, your 46 defense isn't working. You better try something else." And Buddy Ryan's like, "Hey, it's got us this far. We're going to stick with it."
Yeah, but remember one thing. Don Shula through the years was always known as a conservative coach. But getting back to what he told me, I'm going to feed a guy to his strengths. So when he brought in Dan Marino, he couldn't be conservative. And the reason that Dan Marino didn't get along with Jimmy Johnson is he was more concerned about his own stats instead of a running game, which Jimmy Johnson perfected quite well with Dallas to win 2 Super Bowls. So Jimmy Johnson was trying to tell Dan Marino, this is how I did it in Dallas. And I'll tell you what, for all those quarterbacks that subsequently followed, Jay Fiedler was one of your better quarterbacks who came down from Jacksonville, and he wasn't appreciated here. But Jimmy Johnson and Marino clashed because Jimmy Johnson had a formula to get him there, and as it turns out, Dan Marino didn't buy into it. I won't get into the history there, but I'm well aware that Don Shula gave Dan Marino opportunity to do whatever he want. Jimmy Johnson, not quite the case.
I think Jimmy Johnson's biggest formula was hoodwinking the Minnesota Vikings to give him a whole bunch of draft picks for Herschel Walker, and was able to get Emmitt Smith as a running back. And when Jimmy Johnson came here, he wasn't able to get anybody quite that good. So I don't know if it was formula or getting all-pro players like Michael Irvin at wide receiver and Emmett Smith at running back and Troy Aikman. That helps a lot too. Look, what's his name? Barry Switzer won a Super Bowl with those guys. So I don't know if it was anything with the formula, just getting the right guys.
Hold on. Barry Switzer, owes Jimmy Johnson everything for building that team. That was called a gift. No, we're not talking about Jared or Kate Jewelers, okay? We're talking about a gift that Jimmy Johnson gave Barry Switzer when he built that team from the ground up. And then because Jerry and Jimmy Johnson didn't get along well, that Barry Switzer, all he had to do is don't screw it up.
Of course.
That's all he had to do. So that you want to talk about. So let's give Jared and Kate Jewelers a little bit of plug here. We'll know if we'll ever see any money out of them anyways, okay? But at the jewelry store. But the reason why Barry Switzer, has a ring, and he became just a couple of head coaches ever to win a national championship in college and pros, he can thank Jimmy Johnson for that. So,
yes, I agree with that.
Lesson there, Mr. Littman, Mr. Renzy. But the bottom line is Dan Marino did not buy into Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson never coached. Meanwhile, Jimmy Johnson is going into the Hall of Fame. Dan Marino, rightfully so, statistically deserved to be in the Hall of Fame as one of the best quarterbacks of all time. Forget the personal stuff. Fact is, he is in the Hall of Fame, and for good reason. He's made a good living for himself after the game. Although I can tell you one thing before we end the broadcast, when Dan Marino was offered a position in the front office and he was asked, do you realize you're going to have to put a little bit of work into this thing?
I remember.
And then, of course, and he wasn't a figurehead. I'll take the broadcasting gig a little instead.
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember.
So, but anyways, every area has its heroes. I can just say that I'm very thankful on this night that the three of us had a chance to talk about South Florida sports, the good old days, and tying in the good old new days. And hopefully there's some success in the cards for everybody else. Any closing
It's been
thoughts?
fun.
Any closing? All right, Joe, why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you? Ron does the same, and they will do a identification on our part. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Well, you can get a hold of me at the Nora Law Group. We are a property damage law firm in Coral Springs, Florida at 9900 West Sample Road, Suite 300. Our telephone number is 954-749-3151, and my email is jrl@lknoerresq.com.
Ron?
Thank you. I'm also a lawyer. My firm is Wahlberg and Renzy. We handle appellate practice and litigation support. You can reach us also in Coral Springs, Florida. You can reach us at 954-757-1212 or send us an email at info@Wahlberg, WALLBERG -Renzy, RENZY.com, or follow us on social media.
And look at that fancy office he's in.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
One name I forgot to mention on the broadcast I'll do before I close is Doug Pett. He's a guy that taught me a lot as a New York Yankees public address announcer and official scorekeeper. And, being able to cover the New York Yankees during spring training, I have certainly a fondness for that organization as well. So, but I know I've mentioned a lot of names. That's what makes this broadcast even more enjoyable. Rest in peace, Doug. He died a few years ago, but here's a guy who actually was an official scorekeeper for the Florida Marlins at the time when they won their championship, and tying him into Sonny Hirsch, who, by the way, has a press box named after him over at Marlins Park. So just want to get those. So just wanted to get those things in there as well. You can listen to the audio version of the South Florida Tribune podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Another thing I should point out is Ron and I and Joe Littman are part of the Coral Springs Regional Chamber of Commerce, which also consists of Coconut Creek. We belong to the same Wednesday referral group, and it's always a pleasure being with these guys, not only on this broadcast, but also at our Wednesday group. So for a lot of our guys listening, you never know when we're going to invite you to the old big party here. So hopefully you're paying attention. And to us, you never know when you'll be called upon by all of us. There's always room for a fourth person in this booth when you deal with the three of us. Now, in terms of following us, you can follow us at Twitter at Tribune South. That's at Tribune South. Facebook and Instagram, follow us at South Florida Tribune. The YouTube channel for which you are watching this broadcast, please subscribe to it. It's under South Florida Tribune. So please subscribe and click, and you'll be able to get all the updates there. And I'll give you 6 good reasons why you should subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have the Sports Exchange, No Limits, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, Real and the Rare, Fantasy Football, and the South Florida Tribune podcast. Coming up after this broadcast, Candy Abley and I will be talking about the World Series. So hope you can join us for that broadcast as well. Our website's www.southfloridatribune.com. We have a Motor City section for a lot of our Detroit sports. Since I'm from the area, I like to promote my hometown. We also have our media distribution partners provide us content. We also have our columnists that provide us content. Of course, you can find a broadcast on the WSAN dropdown as well. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Scott Morganroth will be more than happy to connect with you as well. So, guys, you know what? To me, this has been a great trip down memory lane here. And, I don't care if it's one of our longer broadcasts. Anytime you can accommodate a lot more stories and bring our histories together in this town, and it's certainly well worth the time that we invested to hopefully bring everybody in the area an opportunity to give us some of their own feedback as well. So, meanwhile, been a pleasure doing it. We'll be back in 2 weeks for another edition of South Florida Tribune Podcast. That's Joe Littman with the Orange Bowl backdrop. Ron in an office someplace, which is vacant. Okay, let the eyes run wild. If you're Ray Charles, then really let the mind run wild. And my office is like Coke. It's the real thing. Okay? So, with that said, my final thoughts are COVID message. Everybody mask up. Use common sense, social distancing, take COVID-19 seriously. There's a reason why we are remote, because obviously this virus is not to be taken lightly. So do the necessary things that you have to do to keep yourself safe. We don't want to hear any stories about you for all the wrong reasons. So meanwhile, on behalf of Ron Renzy and Joe Littman, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the South Florida Tribune Podcast, and we will catch you another time. Good night.
Thank you, Ron.
Good night.
Good night.